America's real black gold, coal. This week we look at a dirty business, the politics of this fossil fuel in an election year, how a powerful industry is protecting its turf, and what that might mean for the planet.
From the coal mines of Illinois, I'm Ubby Lewis, and this is Inside USA. Just below the surface of the election campaign runs a deep seam of coal. Half of America's electricity is generated by coal, producing 40% of the country's carbon emissions. So leading climate scientists have called for a moratorium on new coal-fired power plants, arguing that confronting global warming means confronting America's reliance on coal. The industry has shot back with a massive public relations campaign trying to rebrand this historically dirty fuel as quote-unquote clean coal. And the presidential candidates? Well, on paper, both have ambitious plans to confront global warming, while on the campaign trail, both pledge their allegiance to the coal industry, especially in coal-producing swing states. On this week's Inside Focus, we take a look at the politics of coal in an election year and at the battlegrounds both above and below the surface.
The United States has more coal than any country on Earth, and it's not just sitting in the ground. America burns 1 billion tons of it every year, the equivalent of about 20 pounds per person per day. In the state of Illinois, you can dig down just about anywhere, and chances are you'll hit coal. The Illinois Coal Basin, one of the largest deposits in the world, lies under 65% of the entire state. Coal has a deep history here, and in many ways, the story of Illinois coal mirrors what's happened across the country.
Illinois was one of the primary coal producers in the early part of last century, and then in particular in the 1990s and into early part of 2000, the Clean Air Act was implemented, and that cut our markets more than half.
Environmental concerns pitted against local economies. It's an age-old dynamic very familiar to Steve Carter, the owner of Nighthawk Coal, a small family-run company.
It's a good block of coal to look at.
But the truth is that environmental regulation didn't kill the coal industry, it just forced it to clean up its act, at least as a cause of smog and acid rain. These days, Illinois coal is back in business, and the industry as a whole is booming. Coal prices have doubled in the last few years, and the U.S. is setting all-time records for production.
The miner in along this wall here.
10 years ago, Nighthawk had 20 workers. Today, it has 500.
I've been in the business for 30 years, and I'd say this is the greatest boom that I've ever seen, and much beyond anyone's expectation.
Well, the mysterious thing about America's addiction to coal is most people have no idea that we're addicted to coal. They have no idea that we still burn coal. They think it's something that went out with Charles Dickens and top hats. But in fact, it generates half the electricity in America today.
When coal does surface in public debate, it rarely shows a benevolent face. This is mountaintop removal. To save time and labor costs, coal companies blow the tops off mountains layer by layer to reach the coal within. It's a brutally efficient process, and it's generated furious opposition, with accusations of flooding, blocking streams, contaminating wildlife and water, and literally flattening the landscape. But beyond the local effects, there's now widespread recognition that the biggest concerns about coal are planetary in scope.
Coal is the global warming issue. It's easy for us to instead talk about oil and focus our attention on efficiency of vehicles, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about where the greatest portion of the pollution is coming from, it's pollution from coal-fired power plants.
90% of the coal mined in the United States goes straight to power plants to be burned for electricity. So, just about every time the lights go on, the TV changes channels, or the iPod plays a tune, coal is being burned. That's generating 40% of the country's carbon emissions, almost 2 billion tons of CO2 every year. Scientific heavyweights like Jim Hansen are calling for dramatic action.
This is the thing where people really should try to step in and influence the process. Until our government is smart enough to issue a moratorium on new coal-fired power plants. The best we can do is try to influence the individual plants. You cannot solve global warming problem by turning down your lights or replacing your light bulbs or even buying a different car. But if you can stop a coal-fired power plant, you've made a huge contribution towards solving the problem.
Environmental groups led by the Sierra Club have heard that call and gone into battle against new U.S. power plants. At the beginning of last year, there were 150 new coal-burning power plants in the planning stages. By the end of the year, 60 had been dropped, and dozens of others were sidelined by legal and regulatory challenges. So what's a booming industry to do, with demand for its product facing a deep supply of environmental resistance? Well, in an election year, the answer is politically obvious.
The CNN and Univision Democratic Debate is sponsored by Americans for Balanced Energy Choices.
Meet the Clean Coal Campaign, brought to you by the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity, formerly known as Americans for Balanced Energy Choices. Both groups funded by companies that mine, transport, and burn coal. At this critical moment in America's political and climate history, the coal industry is sparing no expense.
You're looking at 50% of our electricity. Coal. It's the resource that generates half of our electricity at a third the cost of most other fuels.
Our total campaign budget is somewhere between $35 and $40 million a year. Before this year, we were spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million a year. So it is a significant upswing. But again, when you look at the fact this is a somewhat of a once-in-a-lifetime, if you would, situation to get out there and spread what I think is a very important message.
But we've made a commitment to clean.
The campaign to hammer the phrase clean coal into the American imagination has targeted the electoral process explicitly. Last spring, logo-wrapped vans parked outside primary debates in Iowa and Nevada. Paid staffers and volunteers became human billboards and handed out leaflets with questions for voters to ask the candidates.
Every day. Do you support the funding for clean coal energy?
A group of 30 Santas was sent to Capitol Hill to hand out lumps of coal to legislators. And then there was the sponsorship and advertising buy on CNN, which cost $10 million alone. So, are the candidates listening?
We need to have clean coal technology.
$15 billion a year.
Couple of $1 billion a year.
Clean coal.
To develop clean coal technology.
We're the Saudi Arabia coal.
World's largest coal reserves.
Part of what you're hearing is the sound of politics meeting geography.
What are we doing? Senator, this is
the road to the White House will pass through a number of swing states where coal is big. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio.
Thank you so much.
But for both candidates, embracing the coal industry for short-term political gain raises questions about their sincerity in tackling global warming.
Clean coal, as of now, is very misleading because there is no clean coal.
We have clean coal today. We're going to have cleaner coal tomorrow.
Mining and burning coal is like one of the most environmentally destructive things that we do as human beings. Some would argue that the thing we get out of it, the electricity, makes that cost worthwhile. But the idea that it's clean is simply just PR spin.
Both sides recognize that capturing and storing the carbon released by burning coal is the next step. The technology exists, but it's unproven on a commercial scale. In 2003, George W. Bush launched a huge demonstration project called FutureGen to get carbon capture and storage ready for prime time. 5 years later, we visited the site to see how things were progressing. So far, FutureGen has amounted to no more than a field of beans outside of Mattoon, Illinois. The government withdrew from the project earlier this year, citing escalating costs. For those in the industry committed to carbon capture, it was a painful betrayal.
And so here we are over 5 years later, and we pick a site and then we pull the plug, and it makes no sense. I mean, if you believe in global warming, if you believe that we need to produce low-cost energy that's so vital to our economy, then coal's got to be part of that mix.
I think it was just an excuse to say that they're working on clean coal. But the truth is, neither the utilities nor the fossil fuel companies wanted to have clean coal because that makes it much more expensive and less competitive. So they preferred to just say, we're working on it.
In the meantime, the industry continues to sell the idea of clean coal and to fight for new power plants. Here in Illinois, one of the biggest is under construction, the Prairie State Energy Campus. Launched by Peabody Energy, the world's largest coal company, the plant claims to be among the cleanest in the world. But despite its friendly, futuristic name, it uses the same technology, pulverizing the coal and burning the dust, that has been used for decades.
I think that this plant is a dinosaur. I think that it might be one of the last ones built in this country.
Kathy Andrea has spent the last 4 years of her life trying to prevent this plant from being built. She claims that many local residents have been pressured into selling their farms and moving, leaving few to fight on.
They will be sending 12 million tons of carbon dioxide into the air every year. I mean, that's like 2 million cars a year. It's just irresponsible.
It's the embodiment of the problems with this whole clean coal rhetoric, because even though the emissions from these traditional pollutants are better than they were from plants that were built 30 or 40 years ago, it still does nothing about the main problem right now, which is carbon dioxide.
Peabody Energy declined our requests for an interview about the project. But the basic economic argument for coal continues to be made, especially at election time, straight from the top.
Coal, clean coal, $1 billion. Advanced coal. And there's no more reliable source of electricity than coal.
When pressed to go beyond the economic arguments, coal proponents say that climate concerns will be dealt with by the power of American ingenuity.
We need to rely upon domestic energy resources, and we've got to believe in the gift of technology and the promise of technology to allow us to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases in the utility sector.
And apart from a near religious faith in technology, there is one argument coming from the coal camp that you won't hear almost anywhere else these days.
Obviously, one of the things that this industry is facing right now is the hysteria about carbon dioxide. I personally don't believe, I believe that there's more hysteria than reality with a lot of this.
Do we have to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on cleanup on something where the Earth's temperature increased 1 degree centigrade over the last 100 years? I question that. I mean,
I haven't met as many global warming skeptics in one period in my life as I have talking to people in the coal industry.
It's a fact. I mean, it's just...
It's also related to your interest as an industry that you be skeptical of global warming.
It's related to our interests, but you still look, what are the alternatives?
There's far more energy to be generated on tops of these mountains in West Virginia and Illinois from wind than there is, or over the long term, than there is mining the coal that's in those mountains.
I think that it should be a first priority of the next president to say we will have a national low-loss electric grid and do it within a decade. Then renewable energies could take over.
I think the good news is that the science is on our side, that the truth is on our side, and ultimately the positive vision and healthy future of our planet is on our side. And I think that leads to a grassroots movement that will far outpower eventually the dollars spent by the coal industry in this fight.
In the short term, the battle between the environmental movement and the industry lobby will continue in courtrooms and communities across the country. But the future of coal in America may be more influenced by just one man, the guy who will have his finger on the light switch at the White House.
The battle over coal in America is only going to heat up, and the key battleground is clearly coal-fired power plants like this one. While activist campaigns have derailed dozens of proposed projects, one massive new plant is going ahead. In Wise County, Virginia, in the heart of rural Appalachia, construction has just begun on a $1.8 billion conventional coal-fired plant. The approval process was controversial, and environmentalists say they're going to continue to fight. Then again, in a depressed region like Appalachia, it's easy for the promise of local jobs to trump more planetary concerns. To learn more, we brought together two players in the local debate and met them at the site in Virginia. Here's the first part of our conversation.
Jack Kaiser was, until recently, the mayor of nearby St. Paul, Virginia. A former coal miner himself, he's been one of the strongest advocates for the plant. And Carmen Cantrell is with the Wise Energy Alliance, an environmental coalition fighting to stop the plant.
So Jack, let's start with the construction site. What do you think that this is going to bring to this community?
Jobs. The county is going to benefit from taxes, and also St. Paul. The power plant is partially in St. Paul.
This is an economic argument. Carmen, what do you think this is going to bring?
We've had coal production, but we still have large amounts of unemployment, large amounts of poverty, and I think that economic diversity is what we truly need. We need to find another way and start weaning ourselves off of our dependency on coal or in our local economy as well, and look at another way of approaching things.
We haven't talked about CO2 emissions or global warming or the environmental effects.
Certainly, once this plant is built and in operation, if it is, it will be the largest emitter of CO2 in operation today. It will have huge amounts of CO2 that will be just spewed into the atmosphere. It will contribute to global warming, and there is no viable carbon capture and sequestration to be able to offset that. And certainly our area is one of the largest, well, a hotspot as it's been called, for mercury deposition. I mean, we have streams, the Guess River, and several others that are under advisories for not eating fish from mercury.
Jack, do you fish?
I fish, I hunt.
You fish around here?
I absolutely, up 2 miles from here.
So you eat the fish that you catch?
I eat the fish I catch.
So you're not worried about mercury?
We've got bass and catfish, and it's good eating. And no, I'm not worried about it.
But there are 20 advisories in this region around for streams that have been contaminated by mercury because of runoff from the coal, right?
Well, we've always had runoff from coal. Mines are all around us. What are we going to do in the future for our kids or grandkids when they turn your lights off, you go in one evening and you can't cook your meals?
Why can we not put a $1.8 billion money into wind energy here and the jobs that those would provide?
Answer the question.
I'm a coal miner. I believe in coal. I was raised up with coal. Coal's still king here.
Coming up on Inside USA, more of our debate between Jack Kaiser and Carmen Cantrell, and life on the coalface in 2008.